Okay. I think maybe a lot of people, maybe I may just give you a thumbnail sketch of sort of where I've been or what I've done. It'll be just a sentence or two in different places. I took my public school in southern Saskatchewan, so grade 1 to grade 8. We moved to Fergus. I took my high school in Fergus, then went off to Waterloo College for arts, then to Emmanuel College for theology. And during my theology times, I did 2 mission fields, one in Saskatchewan, just east of Lloydminster, and one in Alberta, just east of Vermilion. And then after I was ordained, June and I were married, and I asked to go back to Saskatchewan Conference. I guess we can use the word conference yet. And we went to Porcupine Plain, Saskatchewan, which is about 300 miles straight north of Regina. Mm. We were there for 5 years, came back to Dunwich Pastoral Charge. I was there for 8 years, and that's where I became connected with Pearce Williams. And then I came to Pearce Williams for 10 years, and then to Simcoe, to Old Wyndham United Church for 12 years. And then I retired from here. I say I retired for the first time.
Murray, what year would you have been ordained?
I was ordained in 1962.
1962. And so how many years what year did you retire? 12 years from
1997.
That's a great ministerial career.
Well, thank you very much. Yes.
So you were ordained just after Pearce Williams would have been created,
Yeah.
1960, and that was a time. I'm not sure what you saw out west in Saskatchewan, but in Ontario, a ton of camps came into existence during that time of sort of 1955 to 1965, and I don't know that we as United Church people understand fully why that happened.
Yes. Yes. Elgin Presbytery bought in 1960, and then, of course, my years in Dunwich was 67 to 75. So really, those were the almost the beginning years of Pearce Williams. As soon as I came to Dunwich, I became a member of the camp committee and also on the board of directors. But I'll just give you a little bit of a segment. When I was in Prince Albert Presbytery, I became involved in the camp there, Camp Tapawingo. Mm-hmm. And I was also chairman of that camp for about a year, I think, before we came to Ontario. But we also, in one presbytery, we had 2 camps. And I went to the other camp, and I can't remember the name of it. And I went to a 3-day camp, and it was junior boys. And when I arrived, I realized that I was the only male leader for either 22 or 24 junior boys. Did you ever try to have a cabin group or any semblance of program with 22 or 24 junior boys?
All by yourself, yeah.
All by myself. And so when I came home from that 3-day camp, I said to myself, if the Untitled Church of Canada can't do any better than this in the terms of camping, count me out. So I just about left camping at that point.
Just due to 124 cabin group size.
And there just wasn't any organization to it. It was just, it just didn't, I just couldn't get a hold of it at all. But it must have been at a low moment. Somebody came to me and asked me if I would be part of a junior and intermediate boys camp at Camp Tambawingo. And at a weak moment, I said yes. And then and I guess the part that told me to say yes was the fact that they told me that we were going to, all of the staff were going to go into Tapawingo. We had a cabin to ourselves. We were going to be there overnight and all the next day. And during that time, we were going to plan and prepare for that camp. Well, that camp turned out to be a tremendous experience. It was a great experience. And I would have to say that's what brought me back into camp.
What year would that have been, Murray?
We came to Ontario in 67, probably about either 65 or 66.
In that part of Saskatchewan, I know that their Camp Tapawingo still exists. And
yes.
There's also a Camp Christopher. Camp Christopher is unique in that it's multi-denominational, and we're with Presbyterians. So the Presbyterians and United Church and another denomination all share Camp Christopher to this day.
Yeah. Yes.
But yeah, that first experience has to be, well, I'm glad that you had a better second experience.
Yes. Then when I came back to Pearce Williams, then when I was asked to go on the board and on the camp committee, then I did say yes. And the first couple of experiences at Pearce Williams were not that great because there wasn't a thing called counselor training there. And maybe if I could take a moment, I would just give you a few things of what we did then, because I felt so many ways that we were pioneers. In that maybe I didn't look around enough to see where there was counselor training available or where I could get some ideas for counselor training. So a lot of the things that we did, I guess some of us on the camp committee and myself included, started a counselor training. So the first thing we did, although this came over a little period of time, we did 2 Saturdays at First United Church, of which everybody that was thinking of coming to be staff came. Then we did an overnight in May, and that was just for the staff that was for that summer. Then we did a full week at the end of June, after high schoolers were out and preparing for the summer. Now, why we did a full week in June was not necessarily all spent in terms of planning and preparing, but we had to do the cleaning and the preparing of all of the buildings. There was no maintenance people. There was no secretarial staff. We literally sometimes came in on other people's dirt or things like this. So we had to clean the cabins and do the longhouse, and the whole truckload of food came to the kitchen. And so in amongst all of that work, we did spend quite a bit of time of planning and preparing. I guess those 2 words were probably what we did together. But one of the great things that I think came out of that was that I instigated a closing ceremony the last night out in Vesper Point. I couldn't call it a communion service because there were other denominations, and I didn't want to put young people worrying about was this the right thing to do and all of those questions. So I called it just a sharing time. I had a loaf of bread and some juice and paper cups, and supposedly the communion table was an apple box or a cardboard box turned upside down out on Vesper Point. And we sang and we had scripture and prayer and reflections and so on. And then I asked them to leave and be alone for 20 minutes. Don't talk to anybody else. Just go wherever you want, but then return to the campfire in about 20 minutes or half an hour. And that campfire took on a totally different tone, a different approach. People came with some of the ones who played guitars, brought their guitars, and then we closed our camp there. And some of the counselors and staff have told me that that has been one of the highlights of their camping week and of their camping experience. And then, because in a day or two or three, they're going to be faced with a cabin group of young people, young children.
Yeah.
So it was that cleaning and planning and preparing that really got me back into camping again, realizing that we took time to do a lot of this kind of work.
Well, and to be in community, right? The closing ceremony, the idea of working together and doing the work and doing the planning and doing the ceremony is the whole point of Jesus' teaching, that you do it together. You don't.
Yes.
You're rarely by yourself, right? So that's fascinating. We try to do the same thing where we have we do staff training a weekend and a week still to this day, and also try to make that community online even. So even last summer before COVID hit, we had staff hired and staff online, and that's really where we struggle right now during these times, is that community aspect. I think that's where lots of people struggle as well. But
yes.
So just to clarify, the years you were actually at Pearce Williams, so you were at Pearce Williams from 1975 to 85, is that correct?
85, yes. Yes.
And out of all of your time, and that's a lot of time on the camp committee and at Pearce Williams, what is sort of the one word that strikes you as you think about that time, Murray?
I guess moving, maybe it isn't a one word, but it's a moving into something new, moving into something that became quite meaningful. And as you were sharing, doing those things together. There's a word, I think, in one of the hymns in the new hymn book, worship and work will become one, or something of that nature. And that was the kind of experience, the growth experience that I saw in young people, and as they came practically year by year to be staff. That was one of the things that excited me and kept me there. Maybe before we go into something else, maybe during one of those times that we were meeting as camp committee, there was a woman from St. Thomas by the name of Marion Brayford. She was on the camp committee and he was on the board. And I think almost the camp committee, we had a couple of low ebbs. I think she and I were about the only two on the camp committee at one time. And during one of those times, she turned to me and said, "Murray, you know, we have 195 acres here. Why could we not make this a year-round center?"
Mm-hmm.
Well, that sort of put a light bulb in my head. I guess I'd been thinking about it, but hadn't put it into words. And that's that. And then when we created the position at Pearce Williams, I jokingly say I helped prepare the job and then turned around and applied for it.
Yeah.
And actually, I did a lot of the footwork in bringing the pastoral charges in Elgin on board to support us, because we were only like 15 pastoral charges. I don't know what Elgin was when they whether we were still down to 15 or not.
We were down to 15 churches by the time
15 churches, yes,
that the presbytery ceased to exist. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And so then when I became full-time person, my mandate at that time was to be a year-round center. And that's when we started doing not only camping, but we also had a year-round program committee, of which we did family camping and Friends Together, which is a intermediate girls, and a special U, which was junior girls, and boys roundup, and hymn sings, and New Year's Eve parties, and all of those kind of things. But as you know, those didn't bring in enough money to look at it a straight money thing in order to keep it really moving.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking and listening to what Lillian had to say, you sold that piece of land across the road. I always wondered why we had it.
Yeah, why it existed in the first place.
Why it existed in the first place. But of course, you can put many scenarios to that and so on. But that year, to go to year-round program, then when you see one thing just moves into another, then with year-round center, we had to upgrade buildings. When I was there, well, the dining room sat on blocks.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to raise the building and go underneath it with caterpillars and dig out the basement, put in the foundation and put it back on. Mind you, that was quite a job. And we had a windstorm that took the roof off the pool building. And I see by notes that it cost us $9,000 to put back together the damage that it did to the building. And the longhouse renovations, the 2 bathrooms and the chapel. When I came, those were junk areas. It was just a storage area.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can see, and the upgrades and the updatings you've done in your time, and to know how much it costs to do all of these things, it really was putting a big strain on the finances and everything. But we had to do these things in order to keep going in terms of year-round programming.
Well, and so to continue the mission. I know that, just to go back a little bit, Murray, to your time when you were on the camp committee, I had conversations with Giles Hume before he passed.
Yes.
During the time when he had given a substantial donation to build Hume's Hall.
Yeah.
And he said that, and I don't want you to gloss over this part, but he said that at that point, when you and Mary talked about, why don't we make it year round, that there were 2 factions. Giles describes it as 2 factions on the board, right? A faction that was a sort of opposed to that, and another faction that was, the idea that we need to upgrade the buildings and do these improvements to get it. And Giles always said he was on the more rustic side of that faction. But that's the same time you're talking about, because I know that the dorm addition to the farmhouse was built in 73.
Yes. Because
when Lloyd Allen was still alive, I was really privileged to have him share some information with me before he passed. But
yes.
Yeah. So Giles talked about that faction, and that sometimes those hard conversations with any organization, right, move you forward or keep you where you are. So
yes, those are the things that either we needed to either spend a lot of money in getting buildings, or try to work these two together with year-round programming and buildings and so on. And that's a real, well, you know better than I do, that's a real juggling act to keep things really going and doing. It was a difficult time. There was just a couple of little aside things. I don't know whether Lloyd Allen ever talked to you. He was really there a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The board decided to put on Adam and Eve as one-story building.
Yes, I've heard that. Yeah. Mm.
Lloyd decided it should go up one.
Yes, and that's probably the worst decision Lloyd ever made, because jumping forward 40 years, it's that second story on the dorms, which are just out this window.
Yes.
It is that second story which caused me the most consternation during our fire order challenge in 2017, 2018.
Yes.
Because 2 stories causes problems.
Yeah.
He tells the story that he had an engineer literally approve drawings he did on a napkin, is the story that Lloyd tells about the
I wouldn't doubt.
dorms.
Yeah. Yes. You see, also in the other, just another area of sort of we had to work on in with board was the fact that when we did a lot of training and sending people out for certain things, there was a faction on the board that said, we can pay for them to go, providing the information or the things that they learn from there come back directly to Pearce Williams.
Mm-hmm.
I was always on the edge where no matter whether you went out for some training or something, you use that for life, whether it was at Pearce Williams, within your church or your community or whatever. That's one of the small battles we had to deal with, because they looked at it as too narrow, too looking at it just for Pearce Williams. I guess I was trying to say that whatever these young people or anybody went out for, they brought it back for themselves and for wherever, ever they were.
Well, and wherever they ended up. I know that I attended Bark Lake when it was still around and so Kennesary Camp is where I grew up, and Kennesary sent me to Bark Lake. Their only stipulation on sending you as a staff to Bark Lake was that they wanted you to agree to be at camp the following summer, which when you're 16, 17, life changes, but most of us committed to that and made it happen. But I view it as this idea that when we train young people and we send them off to conferences or gatherings, that if they don't end up coming and using that here, we've actually created better members of society. And the hope is that they go out and represent Pearce Williams well when they go to those other places with this information.
Yes, that was my experience with Bark Lake, was that it really was a good experience for young people, for the leadership training that they got and so on. And really, I was very disappointed when the government sold it. It was such a, as I remembered when our son Don went and Joanne, I took them to Toronto and they got on a bus and went from bus to Bark Lake and back. And they were there for 3 weeks or 18 days or 19 days, whatever it was.
18 days was the regular one, yeah.
And we paid $20 or $25. Well, that didn't even pay for bus fare. But it was the experience that they got out of it. And when I look at what some of these young people got from some of those leadership training events and conferences and so on, and I see some of them in the church and in communities and wherever they are in the leadership role. I remember Jim Pepper said to me one day when we were talking, it was Kennesary and Chatham, you probably know him. He said to me, Murray, when some of these young people get a hold of leadership, they can't let it go. I said, yes, Jim. and that's what happens. And,
that's a great saying. And I could see Jim saying that, right? That
yes,
it's even, I remember my first time here at Pearce Williams that I can remember was in '89. And Kennesary staff came to Pearce Williams to share a bus to go to Toronto for the OCA, the Ontario Camps Association Counselor Conference.
Yes.
And that was really the definitive point in my camping life, because I realized when you show up at a high school in Toronto and there's 1,000 other camp people in an auditorium, and it's so much bigger than just Kennesary, or so much bigger than just Pearce Williams. And it is, and those, those are defining moments when you see things that really, you realize it's a movement, not just a thing that happens in your local church or with your local people. Yes.
Also, the other advantage of getting us beyond our own doors was London Conference Camping Committee.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure when they stopped or whether there's
they never truly stopped until London Conference ceased to exist, but
yes. And also just moving on from there was the Ontario Camping Association, and then I remember there was some meetings, and I can't just remember. We as United Church, I think from across Canada, met at Bolton, just north of Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
Can't remember the name of the center.
Cedar
Glen.
Cedar Glen, it might be. The YMCA owns it now.
Oh, and then we met with camps. It was a Canadian Camping Association, and we met with campers from right across Canada, church people, day camps, horseback riding camps, private camps. And that's where you really got the breadth of what camping was all about. And in so many different aspects. I mean, I think the church camps were in the majority, but it was great to brush shoulders with people from other experiences and other programs. That's what I really felt was great.
And to this day, Murray, that's where I find the most value, is when we go elsewhere. For years, we've been taking staff to Ohio to something called the Buckeye Leadership Workshop, which is in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it would have been known as a Recreation Leaders Lab, which were all through the States. But I go to camping conferences. In 2 weeks, I'm speaking for the American Camping Association, doing an online session. And I was in my last trip. One of my last trips before COVID was to San Diego to go to the American Camping Association National Conference last year. Mm-hmm. And I spoke at it. And that's a big deal because I got accepted to speak at it. But to just be around camping people from across North America.
Yeah.
And in 1984, Ontario hosted the first, Ontario hosted the first International Camping Congress, which was, and I've been to one in Quebec in 2008, and to meet camping people from around the world. It's so much bigger than just Pearce Williams.
That's right.
But what you can do, and I feel like what you did early on when you talk about it, right, is this idea that let's get proper training in place and let's do these things. And I really like to see Pearce Williams be an incubator of ideas that can go out and help other camps and send staff out. I'm totally great when we have camp directors who grew up under me at other camps, because it means that a little bit of Pearce Williams will go somewhere else. And it's a great benefit.
I think you back a little bit. You talked about you grew up in Canassary, but during the years I was there, Pearce Williams, Canassary, and Lambton Center were into counselor training about at the same level or pace or whatever word you want to use. And then we were able to exchange counselors. For instance, if we had a girls' camp, therefore the boys weren't needed, but they might be needed at Canassary. And there was quite a bit of going back and forth from these three camps because we were basically on the, well, I guess I can use the word that we were basically on the same wavelength in terms of leadership and so on.
Yeah.
Well, that was one of the things before we get too far off on this terms of leadership. I guess I knew what was happening, but it came to me very forcefully that as we were doing leadership, getting our young people into a leadership role, then they would be coming back and they would ask for a reference to go to college, to university, to a job, to whatever. And I discovered that really, whether these young people were going into engineering or nursing or teaching or social work or anything, the world out there was looking for leaders. And that just sort of hit me like a bolt. You know, well, I guess I knew it, but, you know, when it hits you like this, and especially when my own son was interviewed for 20 minutes for when he went into engineering, he said 10 minutes were spent on leadership. So in other words, the people that are going to, in the university he was going to, wanted a leader or a potential leader. And so these people are now, you know, well, and same thing continuing, literally all over. Wherever they are, they have become leaders. And I think that's one of the great things that camping does, is helps young people or helps us become better leaders and better examples, if we want to, in our own community, wherever we are. And I really thank God for that all the time. That we may be just one of those things that help them get there.
Yes, we know that also, when we ask church people where about camp, right, when we're at large gatherings of ministers and whatnot, the majority of them found a good portion of their faith or their faith journey they attribute to camping and outdoor ministries. And it's amazing.
Well, yes, and also it came to me that there's, I think during the time I was there was 4 or 5 candidates that went into ministry. I think you've interviewed John and Joan Smith, and they were very involved, and parents were involved, and so on. And to see this happen is great. I drew up another lady, well, she's retired now. She retired, I think, a year ago. She spent 19 years in one pastoral charge in Manitoba, and she's just retired a year ago. And I haven't seen her since camp days. And here, you know, and I guess I have to admit that, you know, the years have gone by.
Yeah. Well, it's still amazing to me the connections that camp can give people, right? That you have friends. So I grew up at Canassary in the late 70s to the early 90s. David Woodall and Donna Bowman Woodall were directors at camp, and right, and then but all of the people that I grew up working at camp with in that late 80s, early 90s are still friends. And even if I haven't spoken to them in years, I know that if I needed something, I can call and we just pick up right where we left off. It's amazing.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the Chinook boys, Chinook?
Yeah,
From
Pat. Yeah.
They're not down here near Long Point, and we discovered through Joanne. Joanne, our daughter, knew them, and we have a market gardening, and so they had a stand, I think, down at Long Point. So June and I went down to see them, a little chat around their booth for a few minutes, and sort of renewed the acquaintances of remembering them and so on.
That's amazing.
That was great. Yes. Another thing that I would like to say in this interview is that when Pearce Williams started, it was really built on volunteers, or volunteers built Pearce Williams. And if we didn't have the volunteers, I don't think we would have got off the ground. And we really have to pay tribute to many people. Well, like Lloyd Allen, good or bad, he did an awful lot of things, and the Broadbents and the Smiths and so on just did an awful lot of work around Pearce Williams and gave it so freely, and those people really deserve a lot of credit. I'd also like to say a little shout out to some of the staff that were there. Art McCormick, who lived in where your office is now, and he was really just a kind of a watchdog when nobody else was around. And then Gus and Barb Langley came, and he became the grounds person or maintenance, and she became my secretary. While the time they were here, then they went off to their ski resort in the United States. And then Sloan and Betty McConnell came. And then there are maybe two people that you've seen as Edith McClellan and Betty McConnell, or Margaret Burwell and Edith McClellan. They called themselves the Bookends. They had worked together a lot. And they came and they did the job in the office for a while. So there's some of these people who came and literally gave so many hours of work and attention to everything that happened. Well, and I think the other thing is that I think our family, Joanne arrived at Pearce Williams when she was 11, and Donald arrived when he was 9. And they grew up at Pearce Williams. And they not only grew up there, but both of them became part of the program as teenagers. And I think it's had a definite effect on their life and who they are now. Joanne is involved here at Old Wyndham. She's just finishing a term as being chairman of the board, and become very involved in the church. So I guess here again is the leadership that you can't, if once you get into it, you can't let it go. John Smith mentioned we did a service, I think it was an anniversary service at Pearce Williams, and I can't remember which one. See, is it the 60th this year?
It was, yes.
60th or last?
The 60th.
Maybe it was the 50th or 40th. I can't remember. And he did the meditation. And I remember him saying in his time, he said, the United Church needs to put more money into camping. And I thought, John, you're right on. Because there's too many have sort of pulled back and have not supported camping. They think it's just sort of a frivolous or, just something that's not. But I think when you become really part of the leadership part of it, it's part of you, who you are. And I think that's a mandate that we have as the church.
There are 55 camps currently across the country.
Yes.
And we at Pearce Williams in my time, and I've been here well, this would be my 16th or 17th summer. I need to count. We have created, Pearce Williams has been integral, and the board has approved the creation and the running out of this office of the Outdoor Ministries Institute of United Church Camps. And our goal really is to give people the information. We can't give them funds because we simply don't have funds to improve 55 camps, to improve 10 camps. But the Outdoor Ministries Institute, the OMI, meet monthly with people from across the board. And what's happening now, Murray, is that a ton of camps are hiring full-time executive directors. And 10 years ago, that, wasn't the case at all. And what helped me realize the power that Pearce Williams has in the camping movement across Canada is that we had a 40-year head start on full-time staffing, right? When you came on board in 75, we had the vision to start something. We still didn't have the funds to do as much improvement as we need. And a lot of camps, that's where you're at. You hire a full-time executive, then they're trying to figure out how to improve their facilities at the same time. So camping has realized that the United Church doesn't have the funds to improve our capital. The foundation has given some funds, the United Church Foundation, to the Outdoor Ministries Institute so that we can do trainings and help people along. But Pearce Williams plays a big role in trying to help. And like you said earlier about leadership, the idea that we want all camps to be great. It's not just about Pearce Williams, because if a parent sends their child to Sparrow Lake and they don't have a great experience, then they might say that all United Church camps aren't a great experience. And so if we can help,
or they won't go back.
Correct. Yeah. And that's really where you see things like the Ontario Camps Association and the Canadian Camping Association, and the movement is that it's a sign of a good camp, right? It's an accredited camp that follows standards and can give this experience as we go forward. That's great. We have not asked any of the questions, which is super awesome. This is what so for those who are watching, I'm normally not on these, but I think that I will be, because it'll be easy to edit. I'll just put it all in and send it off. Do you have one best memory of your time at Pearce Williams, Murray, or does it all sort of blend together?
I think maybe it probably all blends together. I think the one thing that really has kept me welled is the fact that we can have such an impact on leaders. And I think when I was there, I think there's 4 or 5 people who went into full-time ministry. And to think maybe if I had a little bit of influence on them, I would be very happy with that. But I think the leadership would be great, would be one of the things that I would really feel was top priority.
That's amazing.
And how we could be involved with like our own place. It got to the point, and probably the same thing with you, I could phone up Bart Lake and I would say who I was, and oh yes, Pearce Williams, It became part of their, we sent a lot of people to Bart Lake. And I'm not sure whether the weekends for leaders and board members is still happening or not, because there used to be a 3-year cycle. I think they did program, leadership, and property or something in a 3-year cycle at one time. And I'm not sure whether those still happen. But now that it's a whole different area, I remember one of the directors once said, I think she let it slip when we were there. There was a bunch of us were there. She said, "We're camping with an unlimited budget." And any of us would like to hear camping with an unlimited budget.
Well, the imagination you could use if you had an unlimited budget.
Right. That's right.
I've often thought about big, giant numbers, right? If someone was to donate $25 million and if you just spend $5 million of it and put $20 million in an investment, then you can fund Pearce Williams in perpetuity with good management. And the property just to the north of us, Mr. Yates had bought it in '66. It's for sale right now, and they called and asked if we wanted it, and I was like, well, we do want it, but I can't buy it. I don't have a $1.5 million to buy it, and even if I did, there's so many other things we can do at camp with that money right now, especially during COVID times. When you talked about volunteers earlier, and all of the staff currently that are still working have all taken a 25% pay cut during COVID times. And it's really what has helped us survive in the past year is just donors to cover cost and some big donations from organizations. And, but yeah, it's the long-term survival of Pearce Williams is what I think about all the time, and the effect that we can have on other camps, right? Does the United Church need 55 camps across Canada? Those are questions I've always asked.
Yes.
But it's great. Do you have advice? Do you have a single piece of advice, Murray, that you sort of abide by on a daily basis, something you learned when you were younger that has lived with you throughout your life? The question is, what's the best advice you ever received?
I guess one of the things is face reality, face the way things really are, rather than but maybe think of them of what they could become, and maybe have a time of maybe dreaming a bit of where they might go to. Just like when Marion Brayford said to me, well, here's 195 acres. Couldn't it be a year-round center? Well, then the light bulb went on, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I think of thinking of maybe of that dreaming a little bit of where we might be able to go and what would be the next best step. And because we are Christians, when Marion said that to me, was that really the voice of God saying, this is time to move into this whole new area, and I will be with you? I think that spiritual benefit, that leadership benefit, I think are the two things that have stuck with me throughout my life. It's often, as Christians, we need it's sometimes difficult to figure out what is the voice of God, and because if you wait until you are positive it's the voice of God, somebody might have suggested the idea and you were just like, I'm waiting for God to tell me. Well, God did tell you, but he took a different way. That's right. And stepping out into new ideas is really the way that all camps are going to further benefit and survive. We've just received, we're looking at building a seniors housing on site, Murray, so that we can have retired camp directors or retired ministers, so similar to what is in Beamsville. Yes. I forget the name of that community. But the idea that you could have retired people who have a like mind on site and interact with the program and with the kids, so it becomes part of the intergenerational programming. And these are big steps that not a lot of people are thinking about at this moment in time. Yes, that's what the other thing is that when I came on from the board, my mandate was to go year round. But the mandate is also changing. I realized that we needed to change, maybe change counselor training a bit, not necessarily what we had always been doing some new ideas, new thoughts, and those things need to be changed. And you have taken Pearce Williams into new areas, and that's really what, and that's just what you were saying. That's really what it's all about, is that we need to go into new thoughts and keep moving.
One of the best things I ever heard, I worked in private camping. So I grew up in United Church camping, and then I worked at the Taylor Staton camps for 5 summers, which are a fairly well-known set of boys and a girls camp. And one of the best pieces of advice I heard from a fellow camp director who owned a camp in Algonquin Park was that he made change part of his culture. And what happens at a lot of private camps, for people who don't know, is that oftentimes the director will get up on a daily basis, or the owner of the camp, and do a morning, what we might call a morning meditation, but they just, words of the day. Yeah. And what Mike from Pathfinder said is, he said on day 2, because he hadn't owned the camp for long, he said, but on day 2, I get up and my talk is about how change is part of our culture, which means that you can introduce changes and people are like, oh, this is fine because change is part of our culture. Because that's one of the challenges that camps can have, is you can stagnate if you don't, and I'm sure this happens in churches as well, but if you don't have it, that change is a good thing and looking for what's next, it can often lead. But having that saying, change is part of our culture, certainly helps when you change something. So,
yes.
Yeah. That's excellent. Was there anything else you wanted to talk about, Murray?
I think that's pretty well what I've written down here on my pages. And
well, it's funny because I'm looking. We have 14 questions normally, and we've covered some of them and not covered some of them. And can I get you to tell me, Murray, why do you think people should support Pearce Williams? I know that you've talked about it already, but having a blurb that I can edit to say, this is why.
I think we need to support Pearce Williams, to bring children to a place that is safe, where it is where they are accepted, and they're under well-trained leadership, well-trained leaders. I wish I had longer to think about that one, but
well, you can always send me a video later. Yeah. But it's this idea that especially in these times, 2021 isn't looking to be dramatically better than 2020.
Yeah,
this is being recorded on the 14th of January, 2021. Ontario has just entered a stay-at-home lockdown order.
Yeah.
And one of the things we've been doing is we do have some seasonal farm workers on site who are doing their quarantine at camp, and we're set up for that. And that's the only income at this moment in time we're allowed to generate. But it's still nothing compared with what camp or rental groups would bring in on a normal basis. Yeah. So Murray, who are some people that you would like to see answer the alumni video interview questions that you haven't answered all of?
Okay. One in the area would be, well, she was Wanda Wilson when she was there, but she's Wanda Coggle now. She lives south of Wallacestown.
Okay.
And I think you mentioned Laurie Collard.
Mm-hmm.
Laurie Collard. But I think she lives down St. Catharines area, down in there someplace. The girl that was also my assistant director the last year I was there, she was Anne Rowe. Now, Rowe is her maiden name, but I think I was part of the wedding ceremony at Aylmer, and I think it's Legrandeur, Legrandeur, if that's how you spell it.
Okay, I can look that up.
Legr. Yeah, I would suggest those two or three.
That is great.
There's another girl by the name of Jill Hind. Now, have you met Mike Beacom, Reverend Mike Beacom, who lives in West Lorne or Long Point? He retired from St. James here in Simcoe a few years ago.
Not that I remember.
Jill's husband died, and his wife died, so they're together. But Jill was really a good camper, but she's in northern British Columbia. But through this media, you might be able to get her.
Well, and that's the benefit of one of the reasons we started these interviews for you and for anybody watching is that we were to celebrate 60 years last year. And this, for years, I've had this idea of gathering 60 stories for 60 years. And right now, you would actually be number 31 in our interview series, Murray. So we're halfway through that.
You're halfway there.
And the benefit is that we can keep this going, right? Because it captures little snippets of time. And your stories are amazing and great. And even your story about the dining hall, I've seen the pictures of the dining hall raised up, and I'll try and find. I think we've digitized them, and I'll try and find them and add them to that section of this talk. But it's
that project gave us some gray hairs.
Well, and it goes to, as someone who loves camp, right, and loves camping. And when I first got here, and this has been the history of Pearce Williams, is that many of our full-time people either came in as a minister, like yourself, or became a pastor or minister. So Don McPherson and Maya Landell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so people said, well, when are you going to become a minister? I was like, that is not what I do. No. What I do is camping. I grew up on a farm. And I grew up going to camp, and this is what I love. And I'll think about camping 24/7, and I'll lead chapels for kids, but I am by no means the person you want doing pastoral care for people. But I think that this is the benefit of this medium, is that we can reach out and talk to people and keep this so that it is right, that it is part of our history now that we have these interviews and people can find out about Pearce Williams.
Yes. Well, thank you for bringing me on.
Yeah!